The latest AP poll is out. Auburn is holding down the number one spot after their win at Kentucky over the weekend. Duke still at number two. Houston and Tennessee both rise one spot up to 3 and 4. Florida falls 2 spots down to number five. St. John's 6, Alabama 7. Michigan State hasn't moved. They're at 8. Texas Tech 9, Iowa State 10. Clemson, Wisconsin, Maryland, Louisville, Missouri, Memphis, Michigan down to 17 after the Illinois blowout loss. Purdue at 18, Kentucky 19, Marquette, St. Mary's, Texas A&M, BYU at 23, Arizona 24, and Mississippi State rounding it out for us. Others receiving votes: VCU, Vanderbilt, Oregon, Drake, UC San Diego, Illinois, 1 spot behind UC San Diego in the AP poll vote system right now. Kansas got 5 votes. UConn got 4 votes. Both those teams are valued around like the 35th best team in the country right now. We're getting to March, Dion. It's hard to gripe too much about polls at this point, but there's still some things that jump out to me as blatantly crazy here. What did you take away from the new AP poll drop?
I mean, I don't think this is crazy. I would have done it too. Unanimous number one, though. Like, not a single person voted for Duke in the AP poll to be number one. That's pretty impressive if you're Auburn, I would say. It's kind of a bit of a statement in terms of what they've done. Let's be honest, the craziest thing on this list, Michigan State at 8, is absolutely nuts. Absolutely nuts. 1 spot behind Alabama, 2 spots behind St. John's. I think the top five I can live with Michigan State being behind. I think I would have them above St. John's and Alabama, though, if I'm being honest.
Yeah.
The Big Ten's being very, very disrespected as a whole this year, in my opinion. It's much closer to the SEC than it is the Big 12, the ACC, or the Big East. I think the conferences are 1A, 1B, and then a gap, and then everybody else in whatever order you would like to put it. Overall, I just think the Big Ten's being very disrespected. Um, Outside of that, I mean, what does Texas A&M have to do to be unranked? I mean, they haven't won in weeks. Like,
Yeah.
it's been a long time since they won. Um, I'm pretty decently okay with everything else. Maryland's another team that I think is too low. But I do love this Maryland team this year. So if that's a little biased, like, I would understand that. BYU, I also think is at 23. Like, we could bump them up. They've shown they've turned a corner a little bit, I feel like.
So you hit the biggest thing for me here. Michigan State at 8 is an injustice. It's nonsensical. You look at the top five, whatever. Everyone has decided the consensus top five in this sport is Auburn, Duke, Houston, Tennessee, Florida. I think until Tennessee beat Alabama, they would have said it was a consensus top four, and it was Auburn, Duke, Houston, and Florida. Now, because Tennessee beat Alabama, they get to jump a little bit into the top four. Whatever, that's fine. Michigan State has won 5 straight quad one games. They have beaten 4 straight KenPom top 20 opponents. They were not supposed to win all 5 of these games. They went on the road and beat 3 of them. They have better wins than any other team in college basketball has. Even in the entire season put together, Michigan State has more of those in the last 3 weeks than most teams on this list have on the entire year. It's ludicrous to me that this team didn't rise at all. Even if they're not all the way up to 5, which is where I would put them right now, I'd have them ahead of Tennessee. To me, sitting at 8 after what they've done in the last 3 weeks, let alone last week, is crazy to me. It's nonsense. It's not fair. And I do think it speaks to something you're making a point about on the Big Ten, where it feels like nationally everyone's just decided there's no elite teams here. I've been part of that narrative. I've been screaming it since the beginning of the year. I don't think outside of Michigan State there are anybody else, any other teams that deserve being close to the top 10. Michigan State does, okay? They did something that changed all of the dialogue about who this team is by going on this 5 game win streak. And I just feel like they're getting completely disrespected and not rewarded by it. They've got more wins in the last 3 weeks that matter than St. John's has all season put together.
Yeah. Do you think it has anything to do with Michigan or the Big Ten not scheduling a lot of games on Tuesdays and Saturdays? And maybe the AP voters only watch Tuesdays and Saturdays, the SEC schedule.
Dude, I don't know, because it doesn't make a lot of sense to me, to be honest, because Michigan State as a brand is like equally as powerful or better than most of these teams in the top 7. So it doesn't make any sense to me that poll voters have not risen this team up at all.
Yeah, I agree with the narrative. There's no like elite teams in the Big Ten, but let's flip that. I don't know if there's any bad teams either. like I think the worst teams in the Big Ten. Not a big fan of Washington, obviously. Not a huge fan of USC. If you're telling me, hey, Michigan State, your getaway game, your breather, you get to fly across the country to LA. Like that's your breather game. That's still a tough game. That's still a tough game for college age kids. Um, so I don't think you don't get any easy opponents in the Big Ten. Maybe you don't face like the Auburns of the world. But by the way, Auburn doesn't face Auburn either. Duke doesn't face any elite opponents. So there's a lot of schools. Houston doesn't necessarily face like an elite opponent either. So I feel like I get where the AP poll is coming from, where like maybe the upper echelon talent isn't in the Big Ten. But I think when you look at the other conferences, like give me South Carolina over having to play some of these Big Ten schools. Like I'd rather play some of the worst teams in the other conferences than the worst teams in the Big Ten. And realistically, like you said, the 5 straight quad one wins, you don't really get a break in the Big Ten.
Right. Yeah. In their last 4 games, Michigan State has beaten the number 12 team, the number 13 team, the number 17 team, and the number 18 team.
Yeah.
That's their last 4 games. St. John's doesn't have one win against a top 18 team this season.
Yeah.
It's just ludicrous. It's
I
insane.
think the biggest compliment to Michigan State and the biggest reason why they should have risen, they beat Wisconsin, um, and Wisconsin didn't move.
Right. Yeah, it's absurd, and they just didn't raise them. At the same time, that's really my only issue at the top of the standings. I will just throw this out there. Reminder to everyone, we should stop pretending Auburn's better than Duke. I am obligated to say this every single week until the national championship game where Duke inevitably cuts down the nets and is clearly one of the 2 best teams we've seen in 30 years of this sport. All the analytics tell us Duke is better than Auburn. The head-to-head result tells us Duke is better than Auburn. There's zero reason to believe that Auburn is better than Duke at this point, other than the SEC stronger than the ACC. If you put Duke in the SEC, they would probably have the same record, if not better than Auburn does in SEC play. And yes, Auburn would still be good in the ACC as well. But like what Duke is doing, they're winning games by 40 every single night right now. I've never seen it happen in college basketball before anywhere, let alone at the high major level. So look, I get it. They're not going to drop Auburn until they lose. Keep an eye on this week, maybe. Maybe Auburn drops a game with some injury issues. But yeah, let's just I'm out on this. Let's not pretend Auburn's better than Duke. Duke beat them head to head. Duke's murdering everybody right now. Bottom of the AP poll quickly. I have a bunch of issues with teams that didn't drop far enough, starting with my own team. I have no idea how you keep Michigan 17th in the poll after that performance against Illinois. They've had so much late game luck. This team's nowhere close to a top 20 team in the sport right now. I'd be fine keeping them in the poll, but they should be as close to 25 as possible. They're certainly not a better basketball team than Purdue, in my opinion, even though their record is better. It's just a little crazy. Kentucky at 19 after also getting eviscerated with the TV stream cutting out against Auburn. Like, what do some of these teams have to do style points wise to fall out of the poll? It doesn't make any sense to me. You mentioned A&M. That's a good one. They've lost 4 straight games and up 22nd in the poll. And then Mississippi State's another one that I just think is a disgusting basketball team that somehow gets to stay in the poll. Like at the bottom of this poll, BYU's been awesome. They've won a bunch of games lately. They're better than all the teams that I just mentioned. There's a couple teams in the others receiving votes category that I would have had over many of those teams I just spoke about.
Yeah, Kentucky's another one. Obviously, I'm a Kentucky guy through and through, but like that's another team. Like, what do you have to do to drop in the polls? Like, I mean, they're 19-10 at this point. They've struggled in the SEC. Granted, I think a lot of that is injuries, but the facts are the facts. I really agree with your Duke point. I hear everyone that's talking about strength of schedule, SEC versus ACC. You lose me on that when Duke just wins by 40. Right. So it's like, I mean, they're doing exactly what Auburn would do against the same caliber opponent just by punking them, which leads me to believe if you threw them in the SEC, they would also punk those teams. If Duke was squeaking wins out, I would feel differently, but they just win by 40. So strength of schedule just doesn't matter in that case.
The way everyone talks about Auburn, putting them slightly ahead of Duke, would make so much sense to me if Auburn beat Duke. But Duke beat Auburn. What are we doing? We saw these two teams play each other and Duke won. And that was a version of Duke that was not nearly as good as the current version of Duke. So, again, it's fine. They're both awesome basketball teams. They're both elite. But I feel contractually obligated as someone who covers this sport to remind people as much as I can Duke is better than Auburn. It doesn't matter what number you put next to their names. Duke is the historically great team here. Auburn's very great too. Duke is historically great. And if they play again, I would expect it to go the way it did the first time, Duke winning and Auburn losing. I'm sick of polls. Can we, like, at what point in March can we just stop with the polls?
Can we trade the polls just for a bracket? Like once a
Yeah,
week, the AP releases a bracket.
I would like that more, I think.
That'd be pretty dope. It would also help me understand brackets.
That's for another day.